And then we have the data display. This tells us how deep the cutter tool is, what our tide is, what our speed is, and all that good stuff. And then we have specialized drivers such as this Tide DR driver that brings in data from a tide gauge. And then down at the bottom, everybody should really have this profile window. And there's a couple of different arrangements that we can have for the profile window. You can have it perpendicular, you can have it parallel, you can have an arc type display. So these are all the things that we're going to talk about and how we're going to arrange these windows and make the best decision on which windows to have in Dredgepack. Okay? Just to back up a little bit, this is going to make a lot of people happy, and I think Rob talked about it a little bit in the introduction, is the playback feature in the HYPACK shell. Who logs into their dredge remotely and finds out what's going on a daily basis to check up on them? Pretty much everybody's keeping tabs on the dredge, right? Well, for the people that aren't logging into the dredge or looking at the screen real time, we have Captain Mark Keene over here. He's on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Hopper Dredge Quinna. He's in front of Dredgepack all day long, and he sees what's going on. But there are some dredge operations where the operator is the only one staring at Dredgepack all day long. For the people in the office, there's the ability to play back the Dredgepack data as collected throughout the day. And it's really simple. Under the View dropdown, we have a playback. And everybody's familiar with a raw file or a log file. So you just open that log or that raw file, and in the main HYPACK screen, in the map window, you have the ability to load a shape and to see the progress of the cutter tool by time. Because a raw file contains what? It contains a time, a depth, a heading, a pitch, a roll, a heave. It has all of these things that are timestamps. So we can play that back in the main HYPACK shell so you can see what happened during the day. So this is a new thing that we have in HYPACK that's going to allow you to play it, stop it, fast forward, rewind to kind of find out what happened for that particular file. Everybody knows what a dredge is if you're in this room. This is just fluff material here for the PowerPoints. I'm not going to go through all this stuff. But what I do want to talk about, most importantly for us as dredgers, is that we have our equipment set up, we have good power, and that we've got the right device drivers loaded in HYPACK hardware. And these are just some example pictures of some installs that I've done in the past. And it's just showing an inclinometer, a GPS, and then the power station that we've put on a dredge so that we've got real clean power on these plants. All right. You take a big crane dredge, you take a big clamshell dredge, and it's got its generator spitting out real dirty power. All right. We'll put a line conditioner in there and clean that up because that'll affect our equipment, our positioning equipment, our GPS, our inclinometer. All that stuff needs nice clean power. And this goes through the minimum equipment needed. All right. So the most important thing is GPS, right? So RTK GPS to me is the most important thing to have on a dredge. Then you have to have a device to measure heading and depth. So those are the three basic requirements to fulfill a successful dredge in its position. All right. So this goes through, and you have all these presentations you can run through here, and you can look at all this stuff and how HYPACK deals and mounts all of this stuff on your dredge. But I'm going to hit the escape button because I want this to be a practical exercise on how we're going to do things in the field so that we're doing it the right way. So I'm going to go right into the software. All right. So this is my favorite project because I'm a Floridian and I like going to Key West. So this is a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers project from Key West. All right. I've already got it built out and there's a simulation built in there. But what I want to do is basically go through HYPACK hardware and build it out for you so that you can see kind of the basic drivers that we see on a day-by-day basis that maybe you haven't heard about, or how these drivers work. So everybody probably knows by now that under preparation we have HYPACK hardware. Okay? And I've got my simulation in here. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to export this simulation configuration to my desktop. And why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I want you to get in the habit of backing things up and saving your Survey 32 INI files. Because if somebody decides to use your laptop as an anchor, at least you have that Survey 32 INI that has all your connection information for your GPS and your depth devices, but it also includes all of your offsets and your window positions on your laptop and your external displays. Okay, so I'll go ahead and save this right to my desktop, and then I'll start a new one. Okay, so when we start off with a blank slate here in HYPACK hardware, we have a boat. Okay, everything is broken down into mobiles, and I'll get to that in a second. But under the first boat mobile, what's the most basic driver that we use in dredging? Anybody know? GPS DLL. We need a positioning device. So that GPS DLL is found down here, and we just go ahead and add it. The GPS DLL is used for positioning. Is it used for depth? Nope, it's not used for depth, so we can uncheck that. It's used for heading, speed. This is something that trips a lot of people up is, what is that speed doing for me? If you have speed checked for the GPS DLL, it's expecting a VTG message coming from the GPS that has a speed component to it. If it's unchecked, the survey program, Dredgepack, is going to compute it for you. Okay? It's also going to give you tide, water surface elevation. Okay? I'd like at some point for this to be changed, because if you're working in Lake Tahoe, it's not a tide, it's a water surface elevation. So it's going to give you a water surface elevation. Okay? And then we have our connection. Everybody knows a serial port or a network type connection will need to be chosen here. And then we come to the offsets tab. All right? The offsets tab is pretty important, and we need to go ahead and offset that GPS antenna to something. All right? So what's the most important? The world revolves around what piece on a dredge? The cutter head? I heard cutter head. What did you say?
The cutter head.
It revolves around the cutter head. But, okay, so let me ask it in a little bit different way. Where is 0, 0 on a dredge? The trunnion pin. Or the connection point where the arm goes over the side of your ship. Same thing for an excavator. It's the boom pin. It's right in the center of that boom pin is the 0, 0. So GPS DLL gets offset to that position. Okay? What about the vertical? We just talked about the horizontal and where GPS needs to be offset to. If we're using RTK GPS, how do we offset the RTK GPS? Do we offset it to the water? Or do we offset it to the boom pin? We can do either. I like to do it to the boom pin, because I like to turn that cutter tool into a big rover rod, a big RTK rover rod. And if I take the antenna to the boom pin and then I calibrate the tool to the water, now I've just got like what you've got on the beach and you're walking around in a rover rod. That bucket is a rover rod.
Also, that's what you do if you're running terrestrial.
That's right. Yep. So if you wanted to run a terrestrial with the GPS DLL, you would have to check that depth as a function and uncheck tide. So the antenna height minus the rover rod length would be the ground shot. Okay. So starboard, if I'm looking in the dredges this way and the antenna's mounted over here, my trunnion pin's here, what's my offset going to be, negative or positive? It's going to be a negative, right? I need to define where that antenna is to that 0, 0 point. So it's going to be a negative. Most GPSs I see on a dredge are aft of the boom pin. So that's also a negative offset. If the antenna is forward of the boom, it's a positive. If it's starboard, it's positive. If it's left, it's negative. If it's aft, it's negative. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So we'll put a negative offset here for the GPS. What about vertical? If we go antenna to boom pin, it's going to be a negative offset. So let's just say that antenna is 25 feet above that boom pin. You'll put that minus 25 in.
Because it's all depth.
Because because it's all depth-based. In HYPACK, it's negative upward. 0 is the baseline. Okay, so there's a basic driver. Driver number 1 under the boat. Okay. Our next driver. What else will we add in here? I can give you a Travis special in here. If you put 2 inclinometers on a dredge, let's say they're US digital E-track inclinometers, and you put one on each axis, the y-axis and the x-axis, we have a driver that will compute pitch and roll from those sensors. And that's yet another driver. It's the A2TS ATT driver. Okay? So you can have pitch and roll on here. And the reason that I'm showing you this is because this also confuses a lot of people. I just added a pitch and roll driver. But what does it say down here? It says heave. Pitch and roll is inclusive of this heave function. So even though this device doesn't do anything with heave, it has a pitch and roll component that's going to tighten up on your water surface elevation and the horizontal position of your cutter tool. So if you really want to get accurate with your instrumentation on the dredge, I recommend that you get a pitch and roll sensor. Okay? Because when the antenna goes one direction, what goes the opposite direction? Your boom pin. And we need to know that math behind moving that GPS antenna back to where the trunnion is. Okay? Let's see, what other drivers in here? Ooh, we had anything else? Maybe AIS.
What about a rotator?
A rotation encoder for the cutter head? That would be on the next mobile, but that's a good one. So what you can do is to add another mobile, this is the body of the dredge. The boat is the body of the dredge. So you can come in here and rename the boat to the body of the dredge. And the reason that I'm showing you this is you can rename these mobiles because when you're in Dredgepack and you're looking at the data display, there's all of these different fields that you can display in their values. By renaming body of the dredge, it's going to say body of the dredge X, body of the dredge Y, etc. When I make a new mobile, you're going to call that the cutter tool, so that in the data display, it's going to label it cutter tool. So we'll add another mobile, and all you do here is right-click up here on hardware and add a mobile. So what's typically the second mobile? The cutter? Yep, the cutter head, or the cutter tool. Call it the cutter tool. Okay? So with cutter suction dredge, we're going to use what driver? Inclinometer DLL. There's 2 basic drivers, 3 basic drivers, depending on what you're going to use. So for cutter suction dredges, it's going to be the inclinometer DLL. For excavators, it's going to be the excavator DLL. For clamshell dredging, it's going to be the DQM mechanical DLL. And for hopper dredges, it's going to be the Manson DLL or the Uquina DLL, etc. Okay? And those are specialized drivers. But for the 3 basic types of dredges, inclinometer, DQM mechanical, and excavator DLL. Okay? So I'll go ahead and add the most basic one, which is inclinometer DLL. All right? This one serves as a position, depth, heading device. And there's some extended capabilities in this, but I'm going to leave that out for now. You can pull me aside and I can explain later how these other functions come into play. And so this position, depth, heading, and generate output messages should be checked. Okay? Do we want this inclinometer to update the matrix? Of course we do. As we move the cutter head through the survey surface, we'll now get a dredge depth. Okay? So we want to update the matrix with this device driver. And we get a lot of calls on this. How come my matrix isn't updating? Go back to hardware, check this device, make sure it's got use for matrix update checked. Yes, sir. Oh, you can't? Okay. For the inclinometer, it's position, depth, and heading, generate output messages, and use for matrix update. Okay. So for this driver, it's going to require me to come in here and define what type of instrument I'm going to use. We have it set up for all of these different types of sensors. I'm going to have a simulation here. This is great if you want to set up your project in the office and simulate what the dredge is going to do without goofing around with what the dredge is doing. Okay? So you can simulate this all. We're going to do it here in a little bit. Yep. You go to the setup dialog for the inclinometer driver. Right here, setup. Okay? We'll bring this over here. Okay? And I've got some data here I'm going to bring in from this AGI. So I'm going to select the AGI and I'm going to give it a ladder length, 50 feet. Okay? So really that's all you have to do in this driver setup. It's got to be a cutter suction ladder here. You got to specify the type of sensor you're using and then give it a length of ladder. And that's pretty much all you got to do with this driver. And it's set up. And then you can test it. I don't have real-time inputs, so I'm going to go to a text file. And please, if you want these simulation files, I can give them to you. But I have all of these. Let's see if I can find it here. AGI. A lot of files in here. So I just connected it up to a text file instead of a serial port or a network string. And now when I test it, it's going to compute the depth based on angle. Right? We know the ladder length, we know the angle, depth is really easy to get to. All right? How do we calibrate the inclinometer? Not in hardware. You do it in Dredgepack, and I'll show you that when we get in there. Okay? A lot of people will try to go ahead and calibrate right in hardware because the buttons are there, but the hardware program's kind of dumb. The Dredgepack or survey program's smart, and you'll be able to calibrate much better there in the survey program. Okay? All right. The next driver. This is a really important one. The cut fill bar. Has anybody worked with bulldozers on beaches? 2 antennas on a blade? Okay. So what this is going to give you, it's going to give you a display. I have it real time. It's going to give you a display how far you need to take the cutter tool down to get to the template level. Okay. We've also got the swing IND DOL. And this will give you information about how far your cutter head is off of the planned cut line. Is anybody an estimator in here for dredging? Okay, nobody's an estimator? Okay. So, for cutter suction dredge estimating, there is an optimal swath width to cut based on the amount of bank that you have in the channel that you need to cut. So we're going to require 1 or 2 or 3 lifts, right, depending on how much material you need to get down to. So the estimators have determined the swing width. And that swing width is based off of angle of center of swing, based on the depth and the amount of material to remove. This driver helps you confine the operator into an optimal width of swing. Okay? And we'll all display that here in a second. So just doing a basic setup. Okay? We're going to have a third mobile. So this is a basic cutter suction. I'm going to add another mobile, and I'm going to call it the spud. Okay? And to position the spud, unless it's a traveling spud on the stern of the dredge, most spuds are in a fixed position and the dredge pivots off of that point. Since it's a fixed position from the trunnion pin, we have a driver that will easily position that spud after that that trunnion pin. And that's the gen offset DLL. And the gen offset DLL can be used for anything in HYPACK. If you wanted to position the bow or the stern tow point, you can use this driver on your survey boat as well to derive a position from. So gen offset DLL. And this driver doesn't get connected to anything. You just need to go in and define the offset of that spud relative to the 0, spot on your dredge. And it'll be aft. So a lot of times that spud will be directly after the boom pin, or it'll be aft and then port or starboard by just a little bit. The conventions for offset are the same. So if your dredge is 150 feet long and from the boom pin back to the stern is 100, you type in a negative 100 to position that spud aft of the boom pin. Okay. So that's a basic cutter suction setup. Now for excavators, it's really about the same. Instead of using the inclinometer DLL, you would use the excavator DLL. Okay. And the reason that we use these drivers and mobiles the way that we do is because these are relative device drivers. Does anybody know what relative device drivers means? Okay. The GPS is position based, right? You're getting a position from the GPS. So this GPS is resolving latitude and longitude, and we're converting it to X and Y. But the inclinometer doesn't know anything about a coordinate system. It has to be relative to the GPS for its position based on ladder length. So one small little window that not a lot of people find or pay attention to is in this offsets tab right here, relative to. So this driver, inclinometer DLL, is relative to the body of the dredge. And I'm giving you just a little troubleshooting tip here, that if you ever have problems positioning of your cutter tool, check to make sure that your cutter mobile is relative to the mobile that has a GPS installed on it. And I'm telling you this for a reason, because you don't have to have it laid out like this. If you have it laid out like this, naturally, this inclinometer is going to be relative to the first device. But let's say you made a mobile way down here somewhere. You would have to actively come in here to the offsets tab and change the relative to the body of the dredge mobile. Okay? Make sense? Any questions so far?
Another question I have is, when you X out the inclinometer out of the excavator, you mentioned a couple checkboxes that you have to deal with.
So this inclinometer here, this position, depth, and heading checkbox? Right. So because this inclinometer is relative to the body of the dredge, its position is going to be derived by the inclination and the length of the ladder. The depth is from the computed driver based on ladder length and angle. And the heading is going to be the same as the body of the dredge.
But let's say you were running an excavator and you don't use an inclinometer driver, you use the excavator driver.
That's right.
And then you mentioned a couple checkboxes relative with regard to the excavator driver that
Sure. Yeah, we'll go back. That's an important question. So excavator is very similar in its functions to the inclinometer DLL. And by default, you can leave everything checked. Just make sure you have use for matrix update checked here. Yep. And the excavator driver gets a little more complicated in some of the inputs that you need. For instance, you need to define the length of the boom stick in the bucket width, the body length. You need to define where the sensor is in the daisy chain. And we have some other additional features like matrix, bucket matrix angles. Okay? So that you're not updating the matrix when the bucket is wide open.
Right.
You're only updating the matrix when the bucket is in more of a digging type position. Okay? So that can be a little bit helpful. And then we have the ability to put the inclinometer on the bucket, either on the dog bone or the bucket. So we usually put it right here on the dog bone. You need to tell HYPACK the geometry of the dog bone and then calibrate, and then you'll have it in a good position. Okay. Is there any questions about the basic setup right here?
The spud, can you have a spud in the shape file, or you need to have the generic offset driver there?
In the
If the spud is just referencing an offset that's always the same, and you have the spud in your shape file, what is that really doing?
logging. Logging the position to the raw file in case somebody says, oh, you just spud it down on my utility. Then you've got that logged.
Do you have a VLL or any use with the traveling spud?
It's funny that you asked that, because that's something that I'm going to talk to Kyle about, and we're going to develop something in the next few weeks. We have a string line potentiometer that we want to use to measure the distance of the spud traveled and position it relative to the trunnion pin. And I think utility crossings are just going to get more and more, and dredging is going to get more and more. And so that we can make the owner real comfortable about where we're spudding down, I think it's going to be real important for us to measure that.
What is the sensor?
What's that?
What's the sensor that you're using?
It's a string counter. So
Okay.
it just pays out string. It's a
Right.
potentiometer.
Yeah.
Some little known features that we have that get a little bit overlooked, but I'm only telling you the important things, all right? All right, so in hardware for a dredge, there's a one important little checkbox here that's going to make your life real easy, and it's start logging at startup. And what that's going to do, it's going to start logging that raw data file, so that the operator doesn't have to start and stop logging. It's going to automatically do it for you. And then whatever you have set in survey to break up your log, it's going to end at that time and then restart. Okay? So this is a button that you normally would check for a dredge type configuration. Okay? So I'm not going to save these changes. Is there any questions so far about hardware? Okay. I'm going to go back in and I'm going to load my simulation because I want to get right into Dredgepack. Okay. So to import a backed up configuration, you go File, Import in Hardware, and then I've put it right on my desktop. Okay. So mine's a very simple configuration. If you want to simulate this in the office, we have some simulation drivers. We have a Sim32 driver. Okay? And then of course you can put the inclinometer into simulation mode. That's really helpful for when you're making templates and want to work with your survey data. So before you go out to the dredge, you can simulate the dredge parameters versus your template, versus your survey data, without actively being on the dredge with all of its inputs.
Christian, can you rename your INI file, or does it have to be Survey 32?
It does not have to be. It does not have to be Survey 32 INI,
You can rename it
and you can rename it.
Dredge setup, whatever.
Yep. And while I'm thinking about it, I've just got a little bit to add about that. Is every time you go into hardware and you exit, it saves a copy of that configuration in your project's archive folder. Okay? You've got this archive folder right here. And you can see in the archive, I've got all of these different dates and times.
That's every time you close out the hardware window?
The hardware program.
Hardware program.
Right. So let's say, oh, something's messed up. Yes.
It was modified recently. It will only save it if you made a change when you were in there. It doesn't do it every time you're in there, because
Right.
people were seeing hundreds of them just because they were checking on their hardware. Now it does it if it detects a change.
Okay. Yep. So just a good place to look if you need to get back to, yep.
One more, texted me something and I have it resolved on mine. Would you like it?
No, I'm gonna get through.
All right, I just wanted to check.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so if something's kind of goofy, let's just say, all right, HYPACK sometimes, Dredgepack, maybe will close down on you. Maybe it's a file that caused an issue, or maybe there's a setting in one of the drivers or the wrong COM port associated with a driver. Can't get into Dredgepack. It's really easy to go back into this archive folder and just restore it from a time when life was good. All right? And that's what I'll do a lot if you're having problems. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this down and save it. How much
It's really
time?
helpful, even on the survey side, I didn't realize I did ask questions.
What's that?
That's a great tip for even on the survey side, I didn't realize.
Okay.
So that crashed it.
Okay. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the two most important files that help us dredge. The two most important files to me are the survey matrix and the template, right? So I've just got to talk about it a little bit. Jerry's going to go over these files with you tomorrow. How to look at these files in the HYPACK shell. All right? You've gone out and done your survey. Okay? And you've made a matrix. So you've got this matrix right here. There's 2 different, 3 different, 4 different ways to view the matrix in the HYPACK shell. Okay? And I'm going to go into the nuts and bolts of a matrix file here because I want everybody to understand how these files work. Okay? This might take a little bit to load up. I'm going to let it load. Okay. You've gone out and done your survey. You've got an XYZ file. What program do you use to create your matrix file?
TIN model?
TIN model, XYZ to matrix. Yep. So these programs are taking all of the survey depths and they're arranging it into cells to create your matrix file, right? As the cutter tool passes through these cells of a matrix, it's writing another depth. It's writing a dredge depth, okay? So just to open up, let me change this font because this font's just a little too small. Okay. In this matrix file, I've got an XY of one of the corners of the box, XY. I've got a length and a width of the matrix. I've got the cell resolution of the matrix. I've got the azimuth of the matrix. And then this tells us what kind of matrix it is. It's really not important anymore. Years ago it was. But so you kind of ignore that. And then we have all this information about the matrix. And then we have cell numbers. Okay? The first column is the survey depth. So when you make your conversion from XYZ to matrix in TIN or XYZ to matrix, it's going to write this column right here. When the dredge tool passes through these cells, it's going to change the numbers in this column. And that's how we can display the different types of matrix depths in the HYPACK shell.
Christian, real quick.
Yes, sir.
For the cell resolution, is that, I mean, so if I do like a 1x1, is that just way too much data in the matrix? Or is that where you kind of decide that?
Yeah, you know, it's one of those games that I play all day long with different projects because it seems like there's a tipping point on cell resolution versus file size.
Yeah.
My computer has 32 gigs of memory. I can run Dredgepack no problem with a 100 megabyte pre-survey matrix file, no problem. You start getting over that, maybe scale it back, make it a 3x3. If it's even larger, 5x5. So it's a file size resolution consideration that you'll have to make.
Okay, that does
Yep.
make a pretty big difference.
Yeah, it does, especially on your load times like we've seen it in the past where, it just loads a little bit slower when you have a real tight resolution matrix file. It looks real pretty when it gets loaded,
Yeah.
but more file to work with.
Gotcha.
Okay, so
Doesn't the survey program now jump to other matrix files? Would that be something that Dredgepack can do as well?
That is something. That's a good call. They will. So if you have a lot of different matrix files, whichever file you're nearest or in is the one that it's going to attempt to use.
Dredgepack does that as well. Not yet.
Well, that's also a good question, and I'll explain that as well so that we all know how this works. Dredgepack is survey. When you hit the D for Dredgepack, it actually opens the survey exe. It just looks for your key when you hit the D. Does he have a Dredgepack key? Because quite honestly, what you get with a Dredgepack license is just a few more displays. You get a few more different ways to look at the matrix. So can you run a dredge with a survey key? You're going to lose out on a profile window, and you're going to lose out on a couple of different ways to look at the matrix. So,
Survey on a quick.
yeah. So in the HYPACK shell, if you right-click on this parent tree matrix files, you can come down here to display depth. So you can display survey depth, dredge depth, survey minus dredge depth. That would be how much face you've removed. The other way around, dredge minus survey depth. Seabed ID, not applicable. Channel minus survey or channel minus dredge. The nice thing about channel minus dredge is how much material do I have left? Have I removed it all? Because what it's going to do is it's going to use the channel file that we have loaded up here, the CHN file. So I've got this Key West CHN file. That's our template. So it's going to take that template and the dredge data and subtract them from each other and give you amount of material remaining. Okay? So a real good way to look at your files in the HYPACK shell. Does anybody use a matrix file as a template? It doesn't work here.
Yeah.
It only works with a channel file. Okay. So just needed to just mention that stuff before we moved on to Dredgepack.
And that channel minus dredge or survey is the same setup, however you decide to color it, by your space and whatnot.
You're talking about the
Yeah,
color palette up here?
The color scheme.
Yeah, so if you're going to do something like that, dredge minus channel, what you'd probably want to do is set some bands negative and positive
Yep.
relative to 0 so that you get a real nice display.
Christian, is there a way to, if you're using a matrix as a channel file, can you convert a matrix to a channel file?
Yes, sir.
Yeah?
Yes.
Because I mean, like that one job we did, they gave us like the hard bottom coordinates and we're just like all over the place.
Okay, yep. Yeah, you're going to have a ton of triangles, and we'll talk about that later, but it is possible.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
I was wondering.
Okay,
Can I ask one question?
sure.
The difference between survey and dredge depth, if you go into a matrix that you haven't dredged on yet and you have dredge depth checked, nothing shows up.
That's right, because it's only written that one column in the matrix file.
Right. But as soon as you put a single sounding into the, as soon as you change one of those, then it will show up.
Right.
And that's just how it is. It's not a bug.
And that catches a lot of people. So and here's more information. When you install HYPACK 2019 or 2020, as a fresh install, and you go look at your project and you can't see your matrix file on the screen, change it to survey depth. Because at least last version was defaulted to dredge, and we got a lot of calls, hey, I can't see my matrix. And these were non-dredging people that didn't know what that button was. So it was a real easy call, hey, just turn it on survey depth and it fixed it, but by default that was the case. Yep. Because when you make a matrix, it writes that one, and you're right. As soon as that depth is measured relative to that matrix, it writes that separate column. Yep. Okay, let's see how Dredgepack goes in here. Okay, so this is a little simulation that I have. I'm going to kind of move these windows around a little bit. And I got a dredge kind of going around in a circle. All right. So I want to talk about some of these windows in here and what I normally see with dredging. Okay. So templates. Loading a template in Dredgepack. we've got the CHN file, we're happy with it. That template gets loaded under chart, channel. Okay? And it's right here, CHN file. Okay? A rule of thumb for a CHN file. CHN files are really easy to make. You know, they're just nodes and faces. But like what Travis was saying, I've got an undulating bottom and it's very complicated. If you have too many triangles, be careful. You might have to use a matrix as a template. Okay? In any event, you could probably put some pretty complicated designs into Dredgepack. But I'm going to tell you that just go ahead and wait. If you feel like it's kind of, everybody like saw Dredgepack kind of like lock up for a minute and not respond, just be patient. It'll eventually load the CHN of the matrix. If it doesn't after a few minutes, then maybe give us a call or something like that. But what people do is they'll try to load a CHN file and it won't respond, and they'll just keep trying to close it out and early terminate the program. And I'm going to explain why that's the case. I have a survey in here, a matrix, and I have a CHN file. What Dredgepack is doing is it's putting those two surfaces together. And if they're very complicated surface, it's a pretty heavy-duty task putting the template with the matrix, because one of the displays that we get over here is dredge minus channel. Okay? And that stuff is figured out on load and held in memory when you're operating. So just be a little bit patient. Okay? So I've got my channel file loaded. I've already got a line file loaded in the main shell. Why do I have to load another one here? Okay. Let me explain how that works, because that catches a lot of people. Okay. I've got this center line right here that runs right through the middle of the channel. Right? That's great. You always want a center line. When you go into Survey or Dredgepack, it's going to grab that line file that you have enabled, and it's going to use it for left-right indicator. Everybody's done a survey with Survey where they see that left-right indicator and sees how far they're offline, and that's great. And the operator can see this, and he can control his swing left-right. So why do I need to load the line file again? I need to load it again because the case is that when you have it loaded here in the data display, you can get station and offset. So let's go arm, position, chainage, offset. So now that I have up here, I have a station 26 plus 75, and I'm offset from that center line 4 feet, counting left and right. Okay? So the whole idea behind it is the main LNW file that you have that you want to use for left-right indication isn't necessarily the same baseline that you're going to use for the chainage. Because we see these construction projects that people put out, the baseline may be down the dock face, but you're going to arrange your cuts off of that dock face so that you're going to use your LNW file somewhat differently than what you're going to derive your stationing from. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. All right.
And that's obviously your cutter head, the chaining and offset.
Yes, right. Yeah, it's not changing. Well, it's your spud. That's a great question. Leads me into my next thing. Where is stationing derived from? What mobile? How does it know what mobile to use? The mobile that's being used is whichever mobile is the main vessel. Okay? The main vessel is the tracking. So if I make the dredge the main vessel, well, let's make the spud the main vessel. Well, that didn't work. Oh, that's just for left-right indication only. Okay. Because yeah. Okay. All right. Is there any questions so far about that? So working with a matrix file, working with a CHN file, bringing it into Dredgepack.
I had like a workflow question.
Sure.
Like kind of present. So it's often we work on a lot of weapons, and the templates are always like this. You know?
Right.
They're never channels, never straight.
So they're curving.
Yeah, all over the place. So from a workflow perspective, for me to, you know, go from an AutoCAD drawing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I usually go from an AutoCAD drawing to a 10 to an XYZ.
Okay.
And I would love to be able to use channels, like use a channel file. So from a workflow perspective, how are people getting from construction drawings to channel file? Are they making it themselves? Drafting up a channel file, or is there some tricky way to import CAD work, line work?
Points. I'm a big point guy. If you can get me the points, yep.
So HYPACK actually wrote us a program for that exact thing. I don't know if you know this, but for survey, you can take your DXF file or your actual surface that you build in CAD, and you can load it into advanced channel.
Right.
So advanced channel.
DXF 3D faces can be a direct import into advanced channels. So
That makes it beautiful. It works really well.
I used to be
It saved
good-
us hours.
Yes.
so you're using like Civil 3D,
Mhm.
making a surface out of it,
Mhm.
saving it as 3D.
Yeah, we always have to have those surfaces for the other side, and yeah, we got it there,
Okay.
and it worked great. It was beautiful.
So
Right.
It actually is good because from the design side, it allows the designer to give the contractor what he wants. And it's an interface because a lot of designers don't have any HYPACK experience.
Right.
So being able to take a native product from C3D and get it directed, then, you know, you get these etchers in corners and things like that where it's like, well, this slope can't be 1/3 if this one's 1/5.
Right.
Well, then someone else made that decision for you and sent it to you. And
Right.
you see a lot of
And
that.
it works with advanced channel design. Perfect.
Yeah.
It's great.
Another way, just an alternate way, is if you have points. I get a lot of points sometimes from third-party software survey companies on a project, and I'll say, well, just extract all the points out. Tin model can tin it up, and then you can kick out a CHN file from tin. And not a lot of people know that. In tin model, if you go File, Save, it's going to want to, by default, save it as a tin.
Sure.
Change the file of type, CHN shows up, and now you can save it as a CHN. Yep.
So you would bring it in as like basically, you'd extract like an XYZ file from the CAD drawing then?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So these guys are probably really good CAD operators. I usually just divide the line and then do a list command and get it out that way.
That's not the way.
But there's probably a script that you have.
Well, it's just, you know,
I'm not.
Yeah.
So you
Fortunately, you use what you know.
Use what you know. Exactly. And then, because we're all here and we're all dredgers and we want to kind of do things, get it up and going quick, I just want to show you a really quick and down and dirty, easy way to get a basic channel out of this thing. Okay? I'm going to turn off my background files. I'm going to get rid of the CHN. Okay. All right. This is every basic dredging job USA. It's just a straight channel. You're going to make 3 separate lines. You have a line defining your left toe, center line, and right toe. I can make a channel out of this in about 35 seconds. Okay? You just use, I'm not going to do the whole procedure, but what you'll do is you can either use this program here, Advanced Channel Design, and start an empty PLN and import your line here, okay? And do that for the right toe and the center line. Or you can use the old school program, which is just the regular channel design, and do the same thing. Import a right toe line, a center line, and a left toe line, and then build your channel that way. And this one's really simple. So you just import it. You've got center line. There it is. Center line. You give it a Z, we'll call it 40 feet. Fill the column. Chainage, old school way of saying station. You go to left toe, and you'll import the left toe line work. Okay. And these can be complicated lines too, like you're saying. It can be the windy river, and then you give it a slope, and do the same thing for the right toe. Do that 2 on 1.
I can't ever remember working on anything.
That's straight. Yeah.
Curves and stuff, benches. I had one job where every bucket was its own elevation. Every bucket that had a specific elevation, it was contaminated dredge. So every bucket had its own elevation and had to low tempo for it.
Must have been $100 a yard. Okay, so in here, so once you do that, all you do here is kick out a CHN and load that right into Dredgepack. Did everybody know how to do that? Everybody's good with that? Okay. All right, let's talk about these matrix options a little bit. Under matrix options, we've got the matrix update always, while logging, never. For excavator, that makes sense. This is what I really want to talk to you guys about, is how this is used, because this obviously will trip a lot of people up. Who works in elevation mode? Yeah?
Yeah, truss roller.
Yep. Okay. So in elevation mode in Dredgepack, you have to set it to minimum. If you're in depth mode, you want to record the maximum depth. Okay? Because it's flipped the signage of the Z around. All right? So we'll talk about this window in here. I just got a spinning around dredge. Okay. Usually get to the matrix options with a right click in the surface and go to options. And now this is how I display dredge depth, survey depth, or channel minus survey dredge. Okay. This is where you also sun illuminate the surface. Okay. You have to play around with these light azimuths a little bit to get the inclination and the azimuth to display right. You make it real dark or real light, but it kind of makes it stand out a little bit. This projector's not doing it justice. Let's see if I can make it come out a little bit better. Yeah, it lightened it up a little bit down here in the blue, but you can kind of see the relief a little bit more when you sun illuminate it. Okay. So just a right click in the surface. Okay. One display that we have that we added for 2019 Q3 and 2020 is that 3D display that Rob was kind of showing you, and I want to go through on that, how that works. Okay. I was telling you about how the inclinometer DLL has all these functions that we need to check, and one of which is generate output messages. Excavator DLL has the same option, generate output messages. If you want to use the 3D display for excavator or cutter suction, just make sure that's checked. Otherwise, it won't work. So what you do to get this to come up, I've already got it up, but I'm just going to show you where it's found. Under Options, Shared Memory, down here you have the HYPACK Real-Time Cloud. The survey program has the same thing. If you were doing high sweep survey or just regular single beam survey, you could bring that HYPACK Real-Time Cloud up and display your vessel in 3D. Okay? It's just like the regular cloud program. where you left click, hold the mouse, and you can rotate the surface around, and I'll show you how to do that. So I would add another monitor for this on the dredge. I just did a dredge in Savannah where they actually gave me two 26-inch monitors where we're going to put the 3D real-time dredging on one of the monitors. So in here, you've got the 3D display for a cutter suction dredge. And the tools are the same, zoom in and zoom out, with the minus and the plus on the keyboard. Okay? Hold down the mouse, left click, and now you can rotate the surface around. Okay?
What are you using to design your shape?
If you can get me a really cool, and I'll ask a programmer to embed it, because right now that's the shape that's embedded inside for an inclinometer.
Is it
hard
just
coded.
your offsets, or is it just, what's it hinge, does it hinge with the origin and then?
Yeah.
Just have it on?
I'll talk about that in a second, but we know where this guy is down on the bottom, obviously through shared memory, and we know how long the ladder is. And to show you, we define how long the dredge is for display purposes only. Yeah,
You just scale basically.
right. Kind of like what we do for the excavator driver when we scale the body. Yep. So in here, right here, I've got a template loaded in here with slopes, and you can see the dredge relative to this surface. We'll start over here on the right-hand side. It's kind of the order that I start in. So, can everybody see that or no? Is it hard to see back there? There's some options up here, and one of which is enable charts. So any chart that you have, like a DXF file, DGN, line files, you can come in here and configure the charts. And you can add any charts or hit this load button and load files independent of the survey program into cloud. So if you have a DXF file that's not showing over here on the map, but you want to show it in 3D, you can load it independently. And then this is another important piece right here. You can set the level of the chart. So if it's a 2D DXF, you can put it down to 45 feet or raise it up a little bit for it to display a little bit better. Okay. You can put the water level on here. I'm not sure that I saw that water level working earlier. Let's see if we can make it solid. Yeah, I've got my water level at -5. Yeah, still kind of maybe working that one out. Okay. So I guess that's pretty much everything about the settings for that. All right. Here's where you come in and define the parameters of your boat shape. Up here we have width, length, and height. So this is 60 by 225 by 55, and it's enabled. Okay. If you can get me a file, this is where we would load this 3OD or 3DS file. So I'm not sure, does anybody use SolidWorks in here? No.
That's what I was asking earlier. It's like, like the offsets functionality that you want to roll off. Okay, how do you build models?
Right. SolidWorks. Yep. We have a 3D shape editor too that goes back years. It's hard to figure out. Like if I had a whole day to make a shape, I probably could. It's probably not worth your time. But if you can get me a really cool shape, I'd love to use it. Okay. So this program is good for survey or high sweep or Dredgepack. Color bar over on the left-hand side, and then we have the background color. Right. So you've got some interchangeability there. I like it black. I just think it looks better. It's not black. Okay. All right, is there any questions about the map window, CHN's matrix files, or 3D point cloud? Okay, let's move over to the data display.
One quick question. Does
Sure.
real-time cloud window eat your system resources?
That's a good question. My fan's on.
Like, most of the dredge computers use solid
Yeah, so
as much as we can, so they're usually pretty low power.
yeah, so it's eating 50% of my processor right now. But I don't notice any lag, or I can still click around. I think it has to do a lot with the size of your matrix as well. This matrix is fairly big. This is about 6,000 feet by 2,000 maybe, or 3,000. And it's a 3x3. It's a pretty hefty matrix. So, okay. The data display. Everybody knows that we have all of these different parameters that we can add in the data display. All of these things that are in shared memory for position, speed, navigation that we can add. I'm going to put I want to just add a little bit to how the data display works a little bit. Okay? The first thing that I wanted to mention is, how do we change the color of the font in the data display? Everybody wants to customize Dredgepack to a certain extent, right? Or they have an operator. Mark wants to customize his displays. He's the captain of the ship. So there's a couple of different ways that we can customize this. And there's one hidden little feature that, because we're working with mobiles in Dredgepack, under the vessels menu, the perimeter color sets the color of the font in the data display by default. Okay? So if I go to the let's go to the arm and set the perimeter color to red. Anything that's associated with the arm now becomes a red color, or whatever the perimeter color is of the vessel. And I'm mentioning that is because dredges use more than one mobile. We have the body, we have the arm, we have the spud. So just to give the operator, just to give them something a little easier to look at, you can change it real quick that way. You have a question? Okay. All right. The other way to customize Dredgepack that not a lot of folks know about is the Scheme Builder program. Does anybody know about the Scheme Builder program? Okay, just a couple people. Okay. What we have up here is, everybody's probably hovered their mouse around this little button right here. Survey color scheme. Light day, dark night, yada, yada, yada. Right? Everybody seen that one before? Well, these SCX files come from the Scheme Builder program. The Scheme Builder program is, if I can remember, Settings and Scheme Builder. And Scheme Builder, it can be intuitive. You click on these different parameters, these elements over on the left-hand side. And you can define how these planned lines are displayed. One of the biggest complaints that we have by default from people is, I can't see the planned line. It's blue. Because their survey, their matrix is blue. You can change the color of them here. You can also increase the thickness of your line work in the Scheme Builder program. And you saw me, anything, so you don't have to necessarily come through this list and click. But what you can do is, you can click over here on, say, the boat, and it'll find it for you automatically. Or if down here, this is a CHN file. How are we going to display the CHN file? And then when you're done setting the font, because that's another way to change the font for the data display, is to save it out as an SCX file. And that SCX file now, once it's saved, I'm still in Dredgepack, but I think I still have an example. You save it out, and now I saved one a long time ago, Orlando single beam, because I customized my single beam project. So that's just an easy way to do that.
Is that saved in Survey 3299 then? Is that part of that? Or is it something?
Okay, that's a separate file. That's a great question. I had to think about that for a minute. There's actually a folder called Schemes. It's in HYPACK, Schemes, and then that's where all your SCX files are located.
So if you set that, then it should be consistent from project to project?
Exactly, because each project, when you run survey or Dredgepack, or you run, I'm just going to say survey from now on. When you run survey, that will be in the drop-down because it pulls from this folder. Yeah.
Until you update to 2020, then you have to move it over.
Yeah, copy all those. Yeah. Right. Okay, is there any questions on that? Okay, so that's a little bit more about the data display. Let me tell you a little bit. There's, you can keep it on top. Let's see, style, stay on top. This is handy for dredgers. If you are looking for real estate on your monitor on your dredge, you can leave it on top, and now it's always on top of this window. So you can kind of anchor it over here onto the side. And that goes for the survey program as well. Minimize that. Minimize that too. Okay, there we go. All right. I mentioned putting volume in the data display. Under the configuration, if you go to the very top dredge, you can go to area or volume. Volume up and volume down. How much I've removed from that surface. So I've removed a simulated amount of 169.85 cubic yards. How is that set? It's set from geodesy. So if your geodesy is set up in feet, the number displayed here will be in cubic yards. If you're in a meters, it's going to be cubic meters. Okay? If you're in feet, it's going to be square feet. For area, square meters. Okay?
So, I'm sorry, so it's cubic feet, or is it cubic yards?
This is cubic yards. The amount, volume is expressed in cubic yards. Yeah. We would confuse a lot of dredgers if we did it the other way. Yep. Okay. Is there any questions about that stuff? All right. What we're going to do here is I'm going to talk a little bit about this inclinometer window because calibration is pretty important. All right. So I'm down here to the lower right-hand corner. I'm going to get out of Dredgepack. I'm going to go back into the hardware program. Okay. I'm going to change this inclinometer to a different type. I'm going to change it to OCal. I wonder if it's going to test for me. Okay, perfect. Okay. The inclinometer DLL, for most types of inclinometers, has a couple of different calibration routines, and they're confusing. And we find that some people do it the wrong way, and it throws off their depth a little bit. A lot of people in here have cutter suction dredges. Their boom pin is not always exactly at the water surface. In an ideal world, that would be perfect. Cutter suction dredge, boom pin right at the water. But it's normally not. Travis has big dredges, and his boom pin is 3, 4, 5 feet off the water in some cases. Is that about right? Can be? Maybe not that far?
I don't actually sit for the dredge, I sit in the office.
Oh. Okay. I saw a dredge in Savannah. It was almost 5 feet off the water, and they were having calibration issues. They put the cutter head at the water surface and calibrated, but whenever they went down to depth, they were off. And they noticed they were off because the survey boat would come through and survey, and it just wouldn't match what Dredgepack was saying they dredged down to. So here's something that needs to be taken into consideration. And I didn't talk about it earlier because this is where we're at now. in HYPACK hardware, you need to define where the boom pin is relative to the water, using the same type of convention that we use across the board for surveying. So if it's above the water, it's going to be a negative, below positive. So in the extreme case that I saw roughly a 5-foot offset. Okay? And then that's all you have to do. That's the only offset that you really need to focus on for the inclinometer deal, is that vertical offset.
But if you have pitch and roll running, that will, I mean, that basically, I mean, like HYPACK is going to adjust that number effectively as.
Not pitch and roll won't do anything with that.
Okay, it's not gonna actually change the number, but I mean, you see what I mean? It's like, if you have that offset set, but then you have pitch and roll, it's gonna adjust, relative to that offset, right?
It's going to make the lever arm shorter. So you have an antenna height above boom pin, and if the boom is 5 foot above and you didn't put it in, it's going to think that it's longer than it actually is because the boom is up.
Okay.
So now your horizontal position is going to be off based on the lever arm direction. So once you put that offset in, I never really zero the depth. Okay? I use the calibrate button. And if you hit the calibrate button, you're going to put the cutter tool at the water surface, leave it on height at 0, and then hit OK. Unless you have somebody out there with an instrument that can measure angle, don't use this. Because unless your boom pin is exactly at the water, your ladder is never level at 0. It's sticking up a little bit. And a good way to think about this is this. If you have a ladder that's 100 feet long, that's a big ass ladder. That's a long ladder, 100 feet, and it's 5 feet off the water surface. If you take that ladder and hang it straight down, but didn't compensate for that offset, it would be 95 feet in total length. You wouldn't get the full length. So another way to think about it is at 45 degrees, you're going to be off 2.5 feet. That's an important thing to remember when you calibrate your cutter suction, is to account for that vertical, because that'll be your air budget, your air margin. Make sense? Okay. And then people always ask me, well, what do I put at the water surface? You know, do I put the cutter tooth at the water surface, or do I put the suction? I'm not sure. Does anybody have a good answer for that?
Well, I mean, if you're really trying to measure the depth at which you're cutting, it's probably the teeth. But it also probably depends on sediment too, right? Like
Right.
if it's really soft and it's going to fill back in, then maybe it is your suction.
Right. We work in
If it's
some
really
areas.
hard, then maybe
Yeah.
you want to use the teeth.
Right. So usually the vacuum cleaner is inside of the cutter head, and some people will go right to that vacuum, the suction. Some people like go to the bottom of the teeth. You know, that's an on-the-fly material. I usually, if somebody doesn't know and they want me to decide, I'll say put the bottom tooth, because that's what's going to kick up the material to suck into the suction. So that's how I'd calibrate that. Not calibrate fail, but anyway. Okay. Staying on that window, I want to show you the simulation of that inclinometer driver, so that you can see how that works. Okay. That should be good. Okay. Make this big so everybody can see it. Okay. So over here, we have an angle, and if you hit the up and down, it'll lower and raise the angle. So you can see up here that we've got a depth. Another point, don't ever pay attention to the depth over here. The depth over here is always right. Okay? That depth over there is not pitch and roll compensated. It's not draft compensated. It's not inclinometer DLL vertical offset compensated. You always want to look at this guy. Okay? So this is just an easy way to kind of simulate what that's doing.
So what is the zero depth button for that?
It's a good question. I don't want to make anything up. I don't know. I never use it. Okay. I'm going to interchange the inclinometer DLL with the excavator driver. So I'll disable this device, and I'll go to the excavator driver and show you how that works. Setup. Then down at the very bottom, I think. Maybe not, right in the middle, simulator. Okay. Choose that. Now this has got a whole new set of tools in Dredgepack for you to use. I'm not sure what the real-time cloud's going to do now. Oh, there it goes. It put a really goofy looking long excavator on the screen. I'm going to close that down. Okay. I'm glad this happened. I'm really glad this happened. We get calls about this all the time. I can't find a window. My window's gone. There's one way that I always get it back, and I'll usually go up here to Window Manager, and you can go to the excavator interface and hit Restore, and it should bring it right to the front. If that doesn't work, you come over here and hit Tile, and it will tile the whole window across the whole screen. So I can take that and move that over here. And then I've got my simulator windows, which is the Dredge driver. Nope, maybe that's not it. Let's see it right here. Okay. So the nice thing about this driver is it will actually allow you to simulate the arm. And you can use these tools with the excavator simulator to raise and lower the arm or the boom, lower the stick, lower the bucket.
Obviously, there must be some way to change it from like the three to two, right?
Yep. So this has got a boom, stick, add a stick, bucket. So how we deal with that in hardware is, I probably should have paid attention to that, but if you set that second stick to 0, it'll ignore it, and it won't use it as an add a stick. So right here it was defined at 5. If you type in 0, it will disable it. Now we go into Dredgepack. And now I have a traditional excavator on the screen that I can simulate. Okay. If I can take that down. Okay. All right, is there any questions so far? Did I add anything new to what you didn't already know? Yeah? Okay. Nobody has any questions? What would you like to see different about Dredgepack? What would be nice to see in Dredgepack?
I have a question, not something different, but related to matrices. When you're digging and your cutter tool is digging in the matrix, does it update to, when it takes a cell out, does it take if you have a 1x1 matrix, does it take a 1 foot cell out, or does it just update to a tenth, or how does it?
It depends.
Yeah.
It depends on a couple of things. The short answer is yes, it will span multiple matrix cells based on the size of the tool. If it doesn't, then you can use a driver called Vulcan DLL that will span multiple matrix cells based on a user-defined height and width. Yep. And I can show you that real quick. Actually, that's a really good question. So this right here, Yeah, this is a good one to go to. So right here we have bucket width for excavator driver. If you're using just inclinometer and you haven't specified a radius inside of the driver, you can add this driver Vulcan DLL. Oops, added it twice. Okay, Vulcan bucket footprint. We call it Vulcan because Vulcan is a big mining company in the U.S. And I'm not joking. They have buckets half the size of this room, and they want to work on a 1x1 matrix. So we had to develop a way to change all of those matrix cells inside the footprint of that bucket. So we call it the Vulcan driver. Okay. In this driver has a function of depth. It's used for matrix update, and then you have some parameters here that define the shape of the bucket, the length and the width. Okay, so right here, this is a 5x5, so it's going to take that number of cells out of that footprint if you have a 1x1, 25. Yep. We have lots of drivers. If you have any questions about any of these drivers, we have maybe a couple hundred of them. I probably know what 100 do, but we write them for customers. So if you have a device, you're like, hey, I want to bring it into HYPACK, I can show you a generic way to do it because we have generic parsers. Or if you want a custom display for your dredge, we can certainly talk about that too and get you something nice. Anybody have any other questions, concerns? Everybody's dredge pack is working good? Okay. All right. Well, I guess we're right on the money, huh? Close to it. Garrett, any questions, sir? Okay. All right, thanks for coming, y'all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.